Today in the show, I chat with my buddy Mike about his recent visit to Disneyland After Dark Throwback Nite. Mike has been to nearly every single Disneyland After Dark event, so he has a lot to compare it to. I was particularly interested in discussing with him a mind-blowing character meet and greet that I never thought I'd see in a Disney park. It was shocking, but quite a thrill to see. We discussed that and everything else that the event had to offer. Plus, we take a deeper dive into the Disneyland After Dark events as a whole. If you've ever considered attending a Disneyland After Dark but weren't sure whether or not it's worth that hefty ticket price, you'll definitely want to hear all the pros and cons discussed in this episode to help you make a decision. Now, let's watch the sunset and head to Disneyland After Dark.
Get ready for a special conversation about a Disney special event.
Hello, Mike, and welcome back to Disney Coast to Coast, all the way from laughingplace.com. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing quite well, and I really appreciate you inviting me back on the show. I'm glad to be here and happy to talk about this subject. I actually have a lot of thoughts on Disneyland After Dark.
Oh, excellent. I'm happy to hear that. And specifically, you recently went to the Disneyland After Dark Throwback Nite, which recently happened on April 18th and 20th. And we'll talk about that one mostly, but also, yeah, I do want to talk about kind of just the journey of what is Disneyland After Dark. But before we even get to that, Mike, I'm curious if you know, of course, the Disneyland After Dark events started at the resort beginning in 2018. But do you know where the name Disneyland After Dark comes from long before now?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I do remember that when this event launched, 5-6 years ago, there was a band named Disneyland After Dark that had to change their name for legal reasons.
Oh my gosh.
Because it was conflicting with this. Yeah.
First of all, that's hilarious. Like, was it a band that did kind of like Disneyland tunes? Like, was it kind of like a fan band?
I think they just named their band after the experience of being at Disneyland After Dark. But I remember reading about that legal issue and thought it was interesting.
That's kind of funny. And let me just say, thank God I'm Disney with a Z, Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
Because they've named one of their run events Coast to Coast.
Ah.
And I was like, uh-oh. So far, all good. But in any case, Disneyland After Dark is actually an episode of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color that aired on April 15th, 1962. Later, it was released theatrically overseas as a short subject. And as the name of the episode implies, Walt Disney himself prevents a view of Disneyland at night. It features some nighttime entertainment, including a fireworks display, complete with Tinkerbell flying across the sky, and Tahitian dancers performing for Adventureland dinner patrons. However, this episode focuses less on Disneyland and more on the many celebrity singers at the different sections of the park, including the Osmond brothers, former Mouseketeers Annette Funicello and Bobby Burgess, teen heartthrob Bobby Rydell, Monette Moore, and Louis Armstrong. So this actually goes way back, and the title is a throwback to the Walt Disney TV show.
That's cool to find out. Now, I own a couple of those box sets. Do you remember you probably have them, the Walt Disney Treasures DVD box sets? And
yes.
There's a couple that were Disneyland focused, and I wonder, is that special on either of those?
I think this is. I did check to see if it was on Disney Plus, and it is not, unfortunately, but I'm pretty definite that this is on one of those silver case DVDs, which I either own or I've rented from the library. I can't remember which, but yeah, it's a good special, and that's where the name originally comes from. But let's start by talking about Throwback Nite. As I mentioned, it recently happened at Disneyland. Now, this is a repeat of the first ever Disneyland After Dark event. And it's kind of, would you say, inspired by the unofficial Dapper Day that has been going on for many years in the park?
Certainly in the way that the guests dress up, because I noticed this past week when I was there that the guests do tend to, or a lot of the guests do tend to get into the spirit of the 50s and 60s, which is sort of the theme of this Throwback Nite, and dressing up as though they were coming to the park during that era, which would align with the way you would dress for Dapper Day. Yeah.
The outline here is 6 p.m. The mix-in starts, but the event doesn't officially begin until 9 p.m. and it ends at 1 a.m. So it is a 4-hour event. And the price for this one ranged from $129 to $145. And we're just going to kind of go through the moments of it. Mike, I did not personally get to experience this one, but you did. So you're holding up your little pamphlet there, which, first of all, it cracks me up that now the souvenir map is like a legit souvenir that they market. They're like, you'll get a souvenir map. I'm like,
right.
These things used to be free for everything. Now they're collectibles. Come on. It
is in the style. I do like that they sort of went in the style of the older maps.
Yes, that's nice. First of all, one of the things I loved was right on Main Street, you would say in the Main Street Cinema, they had some like historic footage playing of like the making of the park and construction. That was really cool.
Yeah, I hung out in there a little bit. So instead of the usual Mickey cartoons, black and white, old Disney shorts, they've got, 5 or 6 different screens that are usually in there, each playing a different period in Disneyland history. So one is like before construction began, where they're clearing the land, and then next you can see them erecting the animals in the Jungle Cruise, and going through each little era in that early decade of Disneyland history. So that was neat to hang out in there a bit.
Was that something that was kind of like marketed, promoted, or I guess it's probably on the map, but I don't know. This seemed like one of those things that was just kind of a happening. You happen to come across this and you're like, oh, nice use of the space.
I'll be totally honest with you. The way I approach these events now, first of all, what we should get into eventually, but I'll bring it up right now just to kind of spur the conversation, is that this Disneyland After Dark, as an entertainment journalist, as a theme park journalist, is one of the most difficult events to cover because there's often so much going on and so little time to cover it in that I am running around like a crazy person trying to get it all crammed into those short amount of hours. So the other thing I will say is that my strategy now is I will show up and not plan anything in advance, because my plan usually just falls through and I'll just run around the park and take pictures of whatever I can. So I tend to just surprise myself with whatever is being offered. I'll get there. I'll check in as early as possible, which, like you said, for Throwback Night was 6 p.m. And then at that point, I'll sit down, I'll look at the guide map, and I'll go through the priority list, and I'll kind of consult with the higher ups at laughingplace.com to see what are the priorities this time around. As we'll talk about, it was the mother and father characters from Carousel of Progress. So that became like, okay, these are going to be the biggest characters that everybody's talking about. So that became my number one priority. And then from there, I just pretty much make a lap around the entire park and see what I can see and see how many photos and videos I can take within the amount of time that I have.
Yeah, because like we said, 4 hours is impossible. You may be let in, up to 7 hours early, but none of the special event stuff is going on at that point, which means, these characters can become hour-long lines plus in and of themselves, which means as a journalist, you're really getting footage of other people experiencing these characters. You're not experiencing them yourself. Since you mentioned them, and since, frankly, this is the thing that had my jaw drop. Let's start with this. And we should say all of these Disneyland After Dark events, it's usually the unique. And I mean, in the case of Disneyland, super unique characters. I mean, we're talking costumes created for one-time use for these parties, and actors, performers hired, probably doing other stuff in the park, but for this particular role, for such a limited time use, it's kind of mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
And you mentioned mother and father from the Carousel of Progress. First of all, when I heard about this, I was like, what? This is amazing. And then when I saw it, I was even more amazed.
Well, one of the cool parts of that is they covered up the Star Wars launch bay sign and turned it into a retro-looking Carousel of Progress sign, because, as you know, the Star Wars launch bay building, formerly America Sings, formerly Innoventions as well, was the Carousel of Progress in the late 60s. So that was nifty, first of all. And then, it was very cool to see those two characters. I don't know personally, but do you know, have they ever come out as face characters in any Disney park before?
Not that I'm familiar with.
Okay.
I could totally be wrong, but this is like deep cut, deep cut, especially for Disneylanders, right? Like if we're talking Magic Kingdom, it's been there for decades at this point. I don't even know Disneyland with Carousel of Progress. Like I know it existed, but I never experienced it at Disneyland. I've only ever experienced it at Walt Disney World.
Well, I think it moved to Disney World before you and I were born.
Yeah, it was in the 70s. Yeah, so it's pretty
moved
unbelievable.
To Disney World, Walt Disney World. I'm sorry, Walt Disney World.
Yeah, unbelievable. And the improv was just so top notch with this. Like the videos I've been seeing, like these people, they do these are not thrown together performers, costumes, anything. Like when they do it, they really commit to it. And to me, it really shows the passion of the people working on these events. Like, yes, it's an event there to make money, and some stuff is thrown together, it seems like. But there seems to be always something like this that just kind of gets your jaw dropping and saying, oh gosh, is it worth the money? Because it's a high ticket, right? So it's just so wild. In any case, you got to see it in person. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on them.
Well, I'll tell you. So that was the line I was in. Again, I was there early. I hung out a little bit, took my map, went through my priority list, and then I got in line for Mother and Father in Tomorrowland there. I was about maybe 20 people back in line. And then when the time came around, when 9 o'clock came around for the event to start, again, thinking like a theme park journalist, my thought was, well, I can wait for these 20 people to go through, or I can just jump around to the front of the line. I shot video of them approaching, which I tweeted out, was big on Twitter. I shot still images of them chatting with guests, and then I moved on to try to get as much else as I could. So I didn't spend a ton of time hanging out and watching them interacting with guests, but I did think they looked great. From what I could tell, the actors had been trained well to act like those characters in the attraction that we're familiar with from Walt Disney World. And it was just a very cool, neat, very unique interaction, and people were happy to line up and get their photos with them as well.
So do you think it was one of the more popular photo ops? Because I remember when I did like 90s Night and they had Max dressed in his Powerline costume, like undeniably that was the line everybody went to, and I got that. And in my opinion, I'm like, okay, Mother and Father is hands down the line to get into for this one, but I'm kind of weirdly obsessed with Carousel of Progress. How was the crowd overall in regard to that meet and greet?
Yes, I would say this was the one that everyone was talking about. I didn't check back on that line too often throughout the night, but I'm guessing it was a very popular one. The other one in Tomorrowland that I know people were flocking to were the astronaut couple.
The Tomorrowland space couple.
Tomorrowland space couple from the early days of Tomorrowland. So that one was happening in front of the Tomorrowland Theater, and I know that was another very popular one that I just kind of watched from the outside and tried to snap pictures like in between guests or while they're posing for photos with guests.
Now, here's the funny thing to me. There are a ton of character meet and greets all around the park, and I'll list them off in a second. But very rarely is it that, I best spend most of my time in Tomorrowland. Right. And Tomorrowland was the place to be for characters because, as you mentioned, Tomorrowland Space Couple, but also Mr. Morrow from Flight to the Moon was there. So Tomorrowland was where it was at with the characters. I'm going to go through really quickly some of the other characters. If you want to mention any specifics when I get through the list, feel free to do so. Okay. But on Main Street, we had Mickey and Minnie Mouse. Fantasyland, we had Dumbo, Pinocchio and Friends, Cinderella and Friends, and Aurora and Friends. We also had Hyacinth Hippo and Mademoiselle Upanova from Fantasia, as well as Alice and Friends. Frontierland had Peter Pan and Friends. Critter Country had the Three Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf. So, these are characters.
I'll pause you there, Jeff.
Yeah.
I have a couple notes on that. So I was disappointed to see that Mickey and Minnie were just in their ordinary, Mickey was in his tuxedo.
Oh.
Minnie was just in the polka dot dress. So that one, I thought, okay, why not come up with something that reflected more of the throwback nature? But
yeah, especially if they're like right on Main Street. They're one of the first ones you see. You'd think they'd be there to set the mood. Huh.
Yeah. The other thing is the Dumbo costume was also getting a lot of attention. Now, I am not a big character meet and greet photo op person. So I wasn't thinking, oh, how long has it been since Dumbo was around as a walk around character? But I guess it's been a while. You probably know better than I do, but this was apparently an archival costume that had been in storage for a long time, so much so that they weren't even allowing guests to touch it. The performer was behind a roped off area in the Dumbo attraction queue, and folks could come and stand up in front of the rope and pose for photos with Dumbo. They called it a play and wave. That was what I was told. Dumbo play and wave. So people were very excited about that. The other thing that caught my attention as an immersive theater fan, which I know you are as well, and I didn't catch on to this until about an hour and a half before the event ended. But this is the thing, if you're to ask me, a fan of immersive theater, what I liked the most about Throwback Night this last week, there were roving bands of characters that were going around and interacting with guests, as opposed to them just standing in one place and having a line form and you come up and take a photo with them or interact with them. So by the rivers of America, you had, as you mentioned, Peter Pan, Wendy, and Tinkerbell, and they were going around and playing games of pretend with guests in that area. And I stopped and watched that for 10, 15 minutes, and I just fell in love with that idea. I wish this kind of thing would happen more often in Disney parks, rather than just making it about photo ops, which is a big part of what Disneyland After Dark is. I just loved that. To me, this was much more memorable than just making it about the photo op. Then in Fantasyland, on the Fantasyland side of Sleeping Beauty Castle, you had Sleeping Beauty, Aurora herself, Prince Philip, and the three fairies from Sleeping Beauty, plus Maleficent. And they were all, there was like a story playing out that guests could take part in, because all these characters, you never see all these characters wandering together at the same time and interacting with guests in that way. Then over on the It's a Small World Mall, you had the Alice in Wonderland characters. So it was Mad Hatter, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and the March Hare, who I understand is a very rare character too. But they were playing, they were having like a talent show. They were calling guests up to do their own talents, and then the characters were performing talents, and then they were doing kind of like an unbirthday party type interaction as well. So those were beyond seeing the unique characters in Tomorrowland, those were my favorite moments that stuck out to me from this Throwback Night.
Well, you know what I think is so interesting about the whole playing with guests as opposed to, hey, let's stop and take a photo. I think it's like a double win. This is a win-win situation, whereas I think, like you said, it does create a more memorable moment for guests. Now, let's face it, we do live in a world where everybody wants their photo with everything so that they can post it on social media. So maybe that's a little bit of a disappointment for some people. But I do think in the long run, it's a more memorable experience, which is a win. Double win is the fact that because you don't have to wait in a long line necessarily, you can just be passing by, taking video, taking photos. There's probably more posts about it on social media, so it's a marketing win for Disney. So I think it's a guest win and a marketing win, and I think it's a super unique experience, and I love to hear about that. In regard to Dumbo, I'm pretty sure I saw your tweet about this and it got me thinking about it. I was like, I'm pretty sure this is the Dumbo we saw at the opening of New Fantasyland at Magic Kingdom, which would have been, was it 2012? I'm blanking now. It's been longer than we think.
That sounds right.
So I think he's from there. Whether or not maybe this was an original and like the one at Magic Kingdom was a replica, I don't know. But he did look a lot like that.
Okay.
So that's where my head went.
You would know better than I, but I was told that it was an archival one. I don't know from how long ago.
Yeah. We also got the Fantasy in the Sky fireworks, which, this is a show that obviously fireworks shows are huge at Disneyland, but it's just incredible to think Fantasy in the Sky ran for decades, starting in the 50s, like for many decades after that. Now we're so spoiled. We're like, we want new shows every few years. Like, Fantasy in the Sky went forever. To be fair, Fantasy in the Sky had many different versions with the same name. This was like a 4-minute version that they did that night, right?
Yes, it was under 5 minutes for sure, because I shot a video of it. It's up on Laughing Place YouTube channel.
So the thing I have to say about this with the fireworks and Disneyland After Dark is I really adamantly believe that fireworks shows should not be part of the event. And this is why. I was heartbroken at 80s Night because, as we all know, the chance of fireworks being canceled at Disneyland is pretty great. I'd say at least 30% chance, at least. I don't know if that's scientifically correct, but it happens. And I just remember being so heartbroken over such a unique fireworks show that, like, honestly, it was a huge selling point for me. And listen, we all go in knowing that there's a chance that the fireworks may not go off. So in any case, my point is get rid of the fireworks shows for these like short-lived events and just make them projection shows so that in no matter what case, you can do your show. And you know what? If you want to add a little pyro into it, fine. But like, don't call it a fireworks show. That way, if the pyro doesn't happen, it's like, no, we're doing a projection show. But in any case, they did go off for at least one of the nights, right?
It did happen when I was there for the opening night of Throwback Nite this year. But as you mentioned, it does. In my experience, 30% is about right. And in fact, when I was there, I think it was Sweethearts Night this year where it didn't happen the first night. And, we ended up just not having coverage of it because it didn't happen because of the weather.
Yeah, and it's just such a bummer for guests. And let's face it, once again, 4-hour event, if you are taking even 30 minutes of time for a special fireworks show, that's a large chunk of your evening. So I really, 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 truly believe if somebody listening has any decision making in these events, get rid of fireworks shows. Plus, I think it would. Well, I don't know. It's not cheap to create a projection show, right? It's probably I don't know. Like the firework costs more money than a projection, but the design, I think, of a projection would cost more money than a firework. So I don't know, but in any case, that's my 2 cents on the matter.
Sure.
Of course, there's tons of entertainment going on around the park, from Mariachi Espectacular over in Frontierland, swing dancing in Fantasyland. Any of that stick out to you as anything spectacular?
I will say that I remember the days where swing dancing was a regular feature over there prior to it being called Fantasy Fair, where they had that gazebo. People would come, I think, on weekend nights and go swing dancing there. And in fact, when I stopped by there, I did like a little lap around the Royal Theater in Fantasy Fair, where they had the swing dancing, shot a video, I tweeted that out, and that got a huge response, I think, from people who are nostalgic for that period of Disneyland. And I think if they brought that back, that would be a huge hit. And probably not that Disneyland needs to draw more people to the park, but it would be a draw for locals to come out and do swing dancing again at Disneyland. So I'm guessing that Disneyland took note of the popularity of that particular feature, because I know a lot of people were excited about it. As for the mariachi, I stopped and watched them for a bit on the balcony of the Golden Horseshoe, and they were excellent as well.
Very, very cool. Now, one of the nice things, as we mentioned, the lines for photo ops with characters can get insane, but they kind of have these just photo ops with backdrops that are pretty cool as well. Some that really stuck out to me was the Mighty Microscope from Adventure Through Inner Space. You could kind of like take a photo as if you were in one of those ride vehicles, as well as the Skyway. They had like a half of an old car with the old Disneyland sign, and you could like look back toward the camera. They had Walt Disney inside of a television set, very much like how they kind of did a WandaVision thing several years back, and even Walt Disney with Mickey on the train. So they had some really kind of unique photo ops.
They were very cool. Some of them, like you said, were designed to make it appear as though you're on the older, extinct attractions like Adventure Through Inner Space. I did hear guests murmuring that they would have preferred if they had brought out some of the old ride vehicles that they must still have in storage somewhere, but I don't know if that's asking too much.
Those are in archives. Those things are worth a lot of money. They're not going to bring those out for guests to sit in. If they were, it would be probably a museum piece in the Opera House or something like that.
Right. But yeah, the backdrops, the photo ops that they designed for this event were pretty neat, and those were getting a lot of attention as well, especially like you mentioned, the ones in Tomorrowland, the Skyway buckets. The There wasn't a Skyway bucket one. It was the People Mover, right? I thought it was the Skyway bucket one.
I thought they had a Skyway one. I thought I saw a Skyway. I could be mistaken.
Oh, I remember now. The Skyway bucket photo op was across from the Red Rose Tavern in Fantasyland, and the People Mover photo op was in Tomorrowland. So I was conflating those two, but they both did exist, and people were excited for both of them.
Excellent. Yeah, I've seen some of the photos, and they look great. So they're pretty fun. And yeah, it is one of those things that's like, okay, what does happen to these after? Like, I hope they're saved, because I know sometimes I've seen stuff from special events show up at D23 Expo, and, so people get to, experience them in a different way, which is nice. But they did a nice job with the photo ops. Right. Of course, the best one ever being the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids VHS at 80s Night, but I digress. But with the special event, of course, we need specialty food and merch. Can you first tell me what your takeaways were, the giveaways were for your, that came with the ticket as far as merch? Sure.
So I'm wearing one of them right now. It was the Disneyland After Dark Throwback Nite credential, which looks like an old Disneyland admission ticket, which is pretty cool. It's a nice, sturdy, I don't know, what would you call this? Plastic.
Is it like a laminated thing or actually?
No, it's not laminated. I don't even know what you would call this material.
Actually, I think it's called Never Tear Paper.
Never Tear Paper. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it comes with a lanyard, which is nice. It has the Throwback Nite logo on there. And then if you're a Magic Key holder, you could also pick up a Disneyland After Dark Throwback Nite pennant. It's like, one of those triangle shaped pennants. It's a little mini one. It's about maybe 10 inches long or something, but
it's a mini one, not a Mickey one.
It's a,
yes. He went there. I'm sorry. Apologies for the dad joke.
So those were the freebie, or those were included
and the
with
map.
Admission.
Don't forget the map.
And the map was included with admission as well. It was not an upcharge to get the map. So that is a nice keepsake as well.
Was there anything you could purchase merch-wise that you saw that was kind of unique? I know there's a lot of times just T-shirts and stuff, and I know people go crazy for that stuff, but I never do. Was there anything that excited you?
Here's the hitch when it comes to merchandise for this event. When it came time for me to go and take photos of the merch, I went to go ask where the merch was, and I was told it was already sold out. So I never got to see it in person, but it went very quickly because that was probably an hour into the event.
Yeah, I mean, that is, for some people, that's the first thing they line up for, which is absolutely amazing to me. It's like, unless their purpose is to resell it, to me, it's just like the idea of, oh, I want this merchandise to remember this amazing experience I'm having, but I'm not really having the experience because I'm in line waiting for merch. But regardless, personal choices. Let's talk about some throwback food really quickly. There was a ton, but there were a couple just looking at the menu that really excited me that I'm just going to read off. There was a bacon caramel sundae at the Golden Horseshoe. That sounds amazing. There was an Impossible Sloppy Joe fries at Hungry Bear Restaurant. Impossible is not very retro, but I understand why they have the option. And a PB&J burger at Galactic Grill. Those all interest me. Anything that stuck out for you? And or I know you have some dietary restrictions. Were you able to try anything?
The other thing with these events is that I'm often so busy that food is the last thing on my list, both because there's just not enough time to squeeze it in. And as you mentioned, I can't really eat any of this stuff. But I did have friends who went and got, I think it was all 4 of these items that are listed under the Red Rose Tavern, and they sent me pictures of those. So I was able to at least get pictures of some of the specialty food offerings for this. But yeah, that's kind of my big blind spot when it comes to covering these events, is the food, because I can't eat any of it. Sometimes we'll have a second reporter there, or sometimes they'll just have me pay for the food if there's something really special to take pictures of it, and I'll give it to a friend, or, in the worst case scenario, it'll get discarded, unfortunately. But yeah, as far as the food goes, I didn't really get to experience a lot of it, unfortunately, or any of it, really.
You're telling me that strangers don't want to take free food from you?
No, I try to avoid giving it to strangers. That would be very odd and off-putting to them, I think.
I love it. Now, we're going to start talking about Disneyland After Dark as a whole, but before we do, is there anything else that you'd like to say in particular about this recent Throwback Night that you attended?
This was an odd one to me because it both felt like there were fewer guests in attendance than the usual Disneyland After Dark, and it also felt like there was less to do overall. The characters were neat. The fireworks were fun, but very, very quick, as we said, under 5 minutes. And I really enjoyed that sort of immersive style interactions that I encountered in my last hour or so in the park. But other than that, I was a little underwhelmed by this one in particular, as far as, like I said in the past, it has been almost impossible for me to cover everything before the evening wrapped up. But this one, I found myself kind of trying to find stuff to take pictures of in that last hour. So it was a strange one to me. And I noticed that it wasn't sold out, at least from the beginning of the event, when they have those signs up that say tickets are still available if you want to, or may still be available. So I don't know how popular this was. Maybe, my wife commented that maybe it was the wrong name. Maybe Throwback Nite is the wrong name for this event, but we kind of brainstormed a little bit and couldn't come up with a better one. But I don't know if people really understood what it was all supposed to be about. By the way, I don't know if I have evidence of this, but I went and tried to look for the Big Bad Wolf and the Three Little Pigs in Critter Country and could not find them. I checked back there several times. I looked on social media and I asked other people, and no one ever saw them. So I don't know if they ever came out. We may need to do a little bit more research on that, but that particular offering may not have ever materialized.
Interesting. Now, one of the things I wonder, and I always hate when I have, thoughts or, oh, maybe they do this, because the reality is, like, these things don't happen overnight, right? Like, they take a lot of work to be done. But I am curious. You say it was low crowds and it felt like there was less to do, and they really don't announce the specifics of what's going to be there until much closer to the event. So I'm curious if they kind of keep an eye on what crowd levels will be and then decide, okay, this is the amount of characters we'll have. This is who they're going to be. Add this if there's more people. If there's not, save money. We want to make sure their crowds, there's enough to do. They're not waiting around the last hour trying to figure stuff out. So I don't know. It seems like maybe that's a possibility, but at the same time, I feel like decisions need to be made before that. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. In fact, another theme park journalist who I think we both know, I won't name any names, but he told me that he noticed that the attraction wait times were a bit longer at Throwback Nite than at other Disneyland After Dark events. I think maybe because
there wasn't enough to do.
I don't know. It's not like, because you can't really run out, as we'll get into as we start talking about these other Disneyland After Dark events. If you're trying to meet all the characters, it's unlikely that you will run out of characters before you run out of time, because oftentimes you'll just end up spending most of your evening waiting in line, which is, to me, the fatal flaw of Disneyland After Dark. But we'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah, I agree. But so I'm going to start this by going through a list of all of the Disneyland After Dark events that have happened through the years. Like I said, it started in 2018. I know you've covered a bunch of them. So as I list through them, let me know whether or not you've actually attended. I don't know if you've started all the way back in 2018. When did you start with Laughing Place?
I started at Laughing Place in the fall of 2018, but as you know, I worked at Inside the Magic for a few years before that. So I have covered all of these events except for one, which was 80s Night in 2020. I was sick. I had a cold or flu or something. We had come from the Disney cruise line from Star Wars Day at Sea. And as happens after you get off a cruise, sometimes you get a little cold or something, and couldn't make it to that one. But every single one of these other ones I did attend.
That is so unfortunate, because 80s Night Videopolis was amazing. And they had a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids photo op. But in any case, we'll get to it. So as I said, the first one ever was a Throwback Night, and it was January 18th of 2018. The price, $95 for the first ever Disneyland After Dark event. Following that, in May of 2018, we got Star Wars Night. The price went up a little bit to $99. Then we had Sweethearts Night in 2019, 90s Night in 2019, Heroes Assemble in 2019, In 2020, now this is shocking because, of course, the parks were mostly closed in 2020 from March 12th on. But we got a couple of events in before it happened. We got 80s Night in 2020 and Sweethearts Night, both early January, February there. Pixar Night as well. And this was, I believe, the last park visit for me pre-pandemic was Pixar Night. And they had a Villains Night and a Star Wars Night scheduled for 2020. They were both canceled, of course. But Sweethearts Night did return when the event returned in 2022, followed by a Villains Night, which was a makeup for the canceled one. Star Wars Night, same thing, making up for it. Grad Night Reunion 22 in 2022, which was a very weird one where they just kind of tried to make it a school reunion, but for like a ton of different decades, celebrating the last 6 decades. Then Sweethearts Night returned. Man, that one must do super well. I have zero interest, I gotta tell you, but maybe it's just because nobody loves me.
And they did like 6 of them this year. I want to say 6 or 7 Sweetheart Nights, individual nights. So yeah,
that's crazy.
That is a popular one.
And then we got a Princess Night this year. And then Throwback Night, which we just talked about this year. Coming up, we have a Star Wars Night. And for the first time ever, Pride Night in June of 2023 this year. The Pride Night's $139. Star Wars Night goes from $149 to $169. So I think $169 is the highest price there is for this. Started at $95. We're now up to $169. You know, this is a total of, since it started in 2018, 16 events, not including the canceled ones, with 11 different varieties, because of course there are repeat titles here, and one upcoming new one, which is Pride Night. So, considering you have attended all but 80s Night, which is your favorite? And can I guess? Because I know you, is it Star Wars Night, or does it, I mean, you're a Star Wars guy. Does it live up to the hype?
Okay. I sort of had 2 answers for this question. Officially, my favorite one is going to be Star Wars Night, because I am a Star Wars guy. It's cool to see when they bring out very unique Star Wars characters. Like last year, they did Captain Rex from the Clone Wars. Not a character you see often or at all, really. My unofficial answer is one of these that's not officially labeled as Disneyland After Dark. But for all intents and purposes, I did feel like it was designed as a Disneyland After Dark type event. I know at Walt Disney World, they have a regular Christmas party type event. And we've actually talked about this on your podcast before, Jeff. But Merriest Nights, which was not labeled as Disneyland After Dark, was sort of a Christmas type, a Disneyland After Dark type Christmas after hours event. And I really enjoyed that one, especially because of the Muppets Christmas caroling and the unique photo ops I thought were very fun at that. Again, not officially a Disneyland After Dark, but in that same ballpark.
Okay, so your answer is Star Wars Night.
My Star Wars answer is Star Wars, yeah.
It's not Disneyland After Dark. The reasoning, from what I understand, that Merriest Night thing was supposed to be like an Oogie Boogie Bash level sort of experience, where it was going to be a longer event. So I think that was the original intent. And as you saw, it did not return last year for the holidays, to a lot of people's upset. But yeah. Okay. So Star Wars Night for you, that makes sense. That's totally on brand for you. Which one's mine? Now, to be fair, I have not done nearly as many of them as you have. I don't feel that they're necessarily worth the money, but we'll get into that. But which one's mine? Come on.
90s Night.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. 90s Night with the recreation of Afternoon Avenue, the Disney Afternoon theme song, Fireworks. It was not only one of my favorite Disneyland After Dark events, one of my favorite Disneyland park memories of all time was 90s Night. I had a blast. I felt like a kid. Like, it did everything that Disneyland's supposed to do. It did. And it was just so well done. I loved it. But having done so many of them, if you have a favorite, do you have a least favorite?
I will say the one that felt least memorable to me was the Grad Night reunion. That was a very strange one, like you said.
It wasn't specific enough. That's the problem. These events have to be specific, in my opinion. That's what sells them, specificity. And that was like, we've done 80s, we've done 90s, they've done pretty well. Let's throw 6 decades together. But it's just like, no, if there's 6 decades together, there's not enough to do for everybody at that party. Like, the people from the 50s, 60s, 70s, they all want to do different things. So,
yeah, I think I remember being there last year, and all the guests were kind of confused as to what it was supposed to be, even after they had paid to go. Like, both the guests and the cast members it felt like they were in the dark about what the theme actually was.
Yeah, it was a bit confused, in my opinion. My least favorite, and as I said, I haven't done a ton. In fact, I haven't even said which ones I've done. Let me take a peek at that list again. I've only done 3 of them, I think. 90s Night I did, 80s Night I did, Pixar Night I did. And that's it. Yeah, I have not done any of the others. The one of those, I did not like Pixar Night. I actually remember and by the way, we should mention both of us are spoiled little brats and we never pay for these, right? So we go for free.
I've been to all of them except one, and I have never paid for one.
Actually, it's a lie. I have bought tickets to these 90s and 80s Night. I paid for those.
Okay.
Pixar Night was free for me. And I don't regret at all the 90s and 80s Night thing, but sorry.
I will say that Disneyland does not invite us to this as media because it's a pretty popular event. It doesn't really need... I don't know if that's the reason why we don't get invited. Maybe we're just not on that particular list, but we do buy, Laughing Place buys my ticket to go to this event, and that's how we cover it. But also, I'll say that as a guest, as a Disneyland fan, this event, Disneyland After Dark in general, is not something that appeals to me, and it's not something that I would... If I stopped doing my job, if I stopped being a Disneyland journalist that covers the parks for a living, I would probably not continue going to Disneyland After Dark because just the idea of the photo ops isn't something, and that's really what Disneyland After Dark is all about. The photo ops and the character meet and greets. Those are the big selling points. And that's not what I go to theme parks for. So, it's interesting to me as a journalist, not something that appeals to me as a fan.
As an events guy, I love the concept, but I have said this many times on the show and I will reiterate, it's a good chunk of money and it better be a theme that you're really into, where like 4 hours of living in that theme is worth it for you, because it ain't cheap. I'm sure there's somebody out there who just goes to every single one because, the money isn't a concern. And they're like, yeah, sure, I love Disneyland. Let me just do it. Like it's a thing to do. But I am very selective about which ones I go to. They really need to intrigue me quite a bit. And that's the advice I would give to anybody listening. Like, go for it. If you're like, this is so on brand for me as a person, it would be stupid for me not to go. The Pixar Night thing, like I said, was disappointing. It just had lackluster offerings. Like, it was mostly character stuff, as we mentioned, mostly characters that didn't really interest me. And it didn't have anything like super unique, like a mother and father from Carousel of Progress. Like, I think the most quote unquote unique thing were the characters from Onward, and only because they were like new characters at the time.
Right.
There wasn't much new to it. So yeah, it's hit or miss, I would say, but if it's on brand for you, go for it. Now, I did have a question that you can only answer with one answer, because the question was, is there an event you didn't attend that you regret missing? So I guess it would be 80s Night for you.
I did regret missing that. I am an 80s kid. I was born in 1979, so I got to experience that entire decade as a child. And I do regret missing that. I bet it was cool. It must have been cool to see Videopolis, like you said. Yeah, it was just an unfortunate timing for me on that one.
I'm going to the top, Videopolis. Dun, 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 dun. Oh my God, it was so crazy. Hopefully it'll come back so that you can experience it. It really was a fun night.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's crazy. So the one that if I were to do another, I would probably do Star Wars Night, but I'll tell you why it doesn't intrigue me all that much is because the parks are so inundated with Star Wars to begin with. And as you know, I'm a very casual Star Wars fan. I'm not like in it the way you are. So I'm just kind of like, I feel like the parks have enough Star Wars for my personal taste already that to pay a high price ticket. I don't know. Is there anything at those that are just mind blowing? Like, oh my God, like this really is special.
Again, some of the characters you'll see like Ewoks. We don't get that often. And they had those out at one of them. So I'm hoping to see those again. But I will say this last Star Wars Night, 2022, was very unique because it took place during Star Wars Celebration. So you had everybody in town from all over the country and all over the world attending the convention right across the street at Anaheim Convention Center. And then that night, I think it was Saturday night during the convention, everybody walked over to Disneyland and went to Star Wars night. It was just a blast. It just kind of brought the convention across the street, and amazing to be in the park with that many Star Wars fans. All of them were super enthusiastic. Many of them had not visited Galaxy's Edge before. Some of them had never visited Disneyland before, you know? So that the energy carried over to me. So I really enjoyed that. Also, as my friend Nick Tierce points out, that evening saw a great lightsaber meetup at the Millennium Falcon in Galaxy's Edge, wherein the characters of Rey and Chewbacca interacted. They like I think Rey gave a speech at the beginning that was this rousing, inspirational call to the Resistance, and everybody, brought their lightsabers up. I've got some good video of that somewhere. But yeah, just being there and having that event take place during Celebration is a really positive memory for me of these events.
That's so cool. Like, for a diehard Star Wars fan, that must have been amazing. Kind of honestly a religious experience for some, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So very cool. Now, if you had the power to create a Disneyland After Dark event, what would the theme be for you?
Okay, I've got two answers to this one as well. Hopefully these are more qualified.
I'm curious if we have the same answer.
So I don't know if you went to this, but several years ago, it was the 50th anniversary of the Haunted Mansion, and they did an overnight, I think it was like from 11 p.m. to 3 or 4 a.m. event celebrating 50th anniversary of the Haunted Mansion, and I loved it. It was sort of a Disneyland After Dark style event, except I think it was contained to just like the New Orleans Square area. But I don't know, when we get to another anniversary of the Haunted Mansion, I would love to see them just do up the whole park in the Haunted Mansion theme, because I think that would be fantastic as a fan of that attraction specifically. I know we've already got a Halloween party in Oogie Boogie Bash, but just zooming in on that one attraction and celebrating it in that way. There were so many unique and fun and memorable offerings that that's something that I would pay to go back to. And it wasn't labeled as Disneyland After Dark, but very, very memorable to me.
I did not attend that event, but I remember looking into it, and it did look very, very cool and very special. And you know what? It ties into one of my ideas, although this isn't my official answer, but because this is a little crazy, and I'm not even saying they should do this. Considering DCA, Disney California Adventure, has Oogie Boogie Bash, that runs for 2 months, at this point. What if we had a couple nights of Disneyland After Dark, just a Halloween in Disneyland Park? And the reason I say that is because the feel of Halloween at Disneyland is very different than over at Disney California Adventure. Disney California Adventure is green and purple Halloween. Disneyland is black and orange Halloween. And those are two totally different vibes. Would that be insane?
No, I would be up for that. More Halloween is never a problem with me.
Yeah, I think, and then you could even work your Haunted Mansion thing into that, like have that in the New Orleans Square area. I don't know. I think it would be interesting. But one that I would really like to see, and that I really think is realistic and could potentially happen, I'm curious if we're on the same page, a Muppets night.
That wasn't my other one, but I would be all for that. And yeah, that's another one that I would definitely pay as a fan to go and see, because I got such a kick out of seeing the Muppets doing the caroling at that Merriest Nights event. So any incorporation of the Muppets into the park, I'll be all in favor of.
The thing that I think is cool about the Muppets is, like, the Muppets have proven again and again they can fit into anything primarily. So like you could bring back Muppet Vision 3D and put it in the Tomorrowland Theater. You could have the Puppet Muppets performing somewhere. I would kill for a throwback of the walk-around Muppet characters as meet and greets. Yes, we're talking mixed media here, which typically goes against the way I feel about things. But if you kept them separated by lands or something, I think it could work. I think it could be really cool. Plus, there's that whole mythology about the time that that Kermit was going to take over Magic or Disneyland for like a year. Have you ever heard about this? He was going to
Yes.
paint the castle green and the Matterhorn green and all this stuff. Like if they could do a Disneyland After Dark version of that,
Yeah. And
I
you
think
got
it would be amazing.
projection effects now that you won't have to actually use paint. So
Yeah, I think it would be wonderful. So I would love to see Muppets Night. Did you say you had another one though?
I
that you
do.
wanted?
My second idea is a different type of Star Wars night. It is inspired, in fact, by both the immersive type interactions I saw at Throwback Nite last week and the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser, which incorporates immersive elements that were promised to us for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, but never really delivered. So I think it would be a great, great, great idea to use Galaxy's Edge in the way that I think it was originally intended, but never quite panned out, and have it be a separate ticket event where you have, it's sort of like, it would be like Ghost Town Alive at Knott's Berry Farm, where you pay to go into Galaxy's Edge and you have a story play out over however many hours, and you interact with all these characters that are around, and you can become as immersed into it, as invested into it as you want to be, sort of like Galactic Star Cruiser. I think that would be a huge smash hit, and I really hope that someone is thinking about something like that.
I think that would do very well. The question is, how many tickets can you sell considering it's such a small area? But like you said, they did something like that with Haunted Mansion, where it was just that one land being used. So that would be interesting. I'd actually be really interested in checking that out. It kind of leads in to my next question, which is what's an improvement that you would like to see at one of the events that, already does exist? And the reason I say it ties into that is because I felt like it was a real miss at 90s Night, at which point Star Wars Galaxy's Edge hadn't opened, but it was almost ready to open, if I'm remembering correctly. I feel like they could have done a prequels photo op, like with just Galaxy's Edge in the background. Like you don't really get to go into the land, but you can see it lit up.
Right.
And if you had because 99 was episode 1, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. They could have had a photo op and have that in the background. I think people would have lost their minds. I think it was such a missed opportunity.
Yeah. It sounds like a cool idea.
Anything that you wish that had been part of it, like that, one of these ones you've attended, since you've attended almost all of them. Have you ever been like, oh my gosh, why didn't they do this? That would have been so simple and smart.
Well, the thing that I wrote down here for my improvement is definitely going to be line flow, like guest flow, because I've seen so many examples of this, even in very recent memory with the Princess Night, and this ties into Star Wars again. They had Princess Leia and R2-D2 out for meet and greets in Tomorrowland, in front of the Tomorrowland Theater. This was by far the most popular meet and greet during that event, and I heard at one point the line got to be 3.5 hours long. They even capped it, which it's a 4-hour event. So if you've paid $140 or whatever to go to Princess Night, and that becomes your entire evening waiting to meet Princess Leia, you've done one thing. You've paid $140 to get one photo with a set of characters, which is cool. They're very unique. They don't come out that often. You see R2 roaming Galaxy's Edge every once in a while, but Princess Leia is very rare, obviously. So I don't know. They got to figure out a better way to do that. I know with the face characters, they don't like to swap them out the way they do with other, you can have Mickey go into the backstage.
Oh, but even still, they don't do that then either. And this is a huge thing for me because the swapping of characters, I just remember Powerline Max swapped with Goofy.
Yeah.
Dad Goofy.
Right.
And nobody wanted their picture with Goofy. When your option, if you're waiting in the line for hours, you want Powerline Max. It creates a huge problem. You need multiples. Sorry. You need multiple Powerline Maxes. Same with the face characters. That is the biggest flaw with these events.
Yeah. So I understand the issue. The biggest problem arises when you have it's a line to meet one specific character. You could get to the front of that line and theoretically that character could go on break for like a half an hour. So you end up standing there. It just adds another half hour to your wait just because of the timing didn't work out in your favor. And, like we mentioned before, you and I are both usually not paying to go to these events. So I'm there as an observer, as a journalist. If I were a paying guest who really wanted to go and meet Princess Leia and hopefully get to go and do other things during the Princess Night that are offered, I would be super frustrated and upset if I spent the entirety of that night waiting to meet Princess Leia. And there was a chance that if you waited too long to get in that line that you might not have been able to meet her at all. So that to me is the epitome or the encapsulation of my my frustrations with Disneyland After Dark as an event. I think the meet and greets are handled poorly the way that the lines work out.
Number one, just bad guest experience.
Yeah.
But number two, how long until you think lightning lanes are sold for those? And I'm being serious.
That would be really unfortunate, I think, and it would rightfully upset people, I would say.
Do you think they could do like D23 Expo where it's you pick things and randomly get assigned? What they have now does not work. But here's the thing. People keep going. So like maybe your people are content enough paying $140 to meet one character they really want to meet. To me, that's insanity. But maybe to a lot of people, it's just not.
Well, I've had similar experiences at other theme parks, again, as an observer, because I have been invited as media to an event like Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Hollywood. And with the media entry comes front of the line pass. So we get to just walk into the mazes one time each. It's not like we can go on a loop. But as I do that, I'm observing the lines, the incredibly lengthy lines to get through these Halloween mazes. And I've talked to people who have gone as regular guests, and they're like, oh, yeah, we got through more than half of the mazes. We were super happy. I was like, I would be furious if I paid to go to that event and didn't get through all of the mazes. This is, to me, that's what I'm buying a ticket for. But the same thing applies to these Disneyland After Dark events. I just feel like I would not be getting my money's worth.
Yeah, with Halloween Horror Nights, I've just made the decision. If I usually go as media for Hollywood, but when I go to Orlando, I usually buy a ticket, and I won't go unless I buy a front of line ticket. And you know me, I'm very adamantly against stuff like Lightning Lane and stuff like that. For special events, I feel a bit differently because it is so rare, like such a rare opportunity, so fragile. Yeah. It's not going to be repeated often. So, you know, perhaps a bit of hypocrisy there, but yeah, the character thing is a real problem for Disneyland After Dark. I do want to mention a couple other improvements I would have loved to have seen. I probably mentioned on here before, but at 90s Night, it's a real shame Honey, I Shrunk the Audience wasn't shown for the night inside the Tomorrowland Theater. I think that would have been a really nice throwback experience. And, you know, it's primarily just film. It's not the flip of a switch, but I think would have been doable.
Yeah.
And then 80s Night, I will never get over not having a Wayne Zielinski meet and greet over in Pixie Hollow. I think that would have been perfection. And there is a Dapper Dan, who I will not name, who pretty much looks like Wayne Zielinski. So just saying, I appreciated the VHS photo op of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but huge missed opportunity.
No excuse. Gotta bring out Wayne Zielinski.
Yeah. Let me ask you one thing that kind of bothers me just because I'm weird and OCD in this way, but does it bother you that it's called Disneyland After Dark and several of the events have been in Disney California Adventure?
A little bit. I will say it does bother me a little. It's not called Disneyland Resort After Dark.
Correct.
So it has bothered me a little bit. Yes.
Yeah, it's weird. Anyway, so I feel like we've kind of answered this already, but is the current cost around $139-ish, you know, in that realm? Is it worth it for the offerings available?
I would say it depends what your goals are. I've actually talked to people who do it this way. They do it the same way I do, which is they just wander around and absorb the atmosphere, absorb the unique projection effects if they have them, look at the characters from afar as they're interacting with guests, watch the entertainment like I did. If you're doing it that way, I could see it being worth it. If you want to experience everything and meet all the characters and have all the interactions, it's just not possible. So you're not going to get your money's worth in that way. The other way you can experience this event, and I have recommended people to experience it this way. If you're not an annual pass holder, if you're not a Magic Key holder, I actually recommend going and just doing the attractions at Disneyland After Dark. It's a great opportunity where the lines are not terribly long. Like I said, it was probably a little bit of a longer wait at Throwback Night for some of the attractions, but otherwise, it's roughly the same cost as a single day ticket. You get to go in at 6 p.m. and you get to stay till 1 a.m. So what is that? 7 hours of pretty much unfettered access to all these attractions. And it's a unique way, the atmosphere of the park is a little different. So it's a unique way to have stuff going on in the background while you're running around and doing all the attractions. So that's a different approach to people who are not Magic Key holders if they want to just have a fun night out at Disneyland.
All right. So basically, think about it. You gotta know why you're going.
Yeah.
You've either got to be diehard niche in the fandom of the specific theme, and or just go with like a mission in mind. And if it's to meet a particular character, you need to be content with the fact that that might be the only thing you're doing that night, because that is not uncommon. It's very common.
Well, my recommendation would actually be, you can probably get in 3 of these unique characters, or maybe 2 or 3. So you get there, you check in as early as you possibly can, and just go right to where that character is going to be and get in line.
So that means you're giving up 3 hours.
You are
of
giving
park
up,
time.
yeah, you're giving up several hours of park time. But the trade-off is that you'll be one of the first to meet that character. And then you can go and do something else. If it's another character you want to meet, you may have to wait 2 or 3 hours to meet them. Who knows? But at least then you can cram in some other stuff during the event as well.
Yeah. Anyway, Disneyland After Dark. It's a thing that's been around since 2018. There's some amazing things about it, and I've had some incredible memories from it. There are some things that are problematic. Hopefully, this episode was informative. Before we go, anything you'd like to add specifically about Disneyland After Dark, Mike?
Yeah, I remember, again, in my notes here, I wrote down during the Heroes Assembled night.
I'm surprised that hasn't returned. Marvel night?
Me too.
Very surprised.
Me too. They had, I think this is where they introduced the Mickey and Friends characters dressed like Disney bounding as the Marvel superheroes,
Yes.
which I thought those are really fun outfits that they've brought back, I think, for a couple things since then. But that was a lot of fun too.
Well, the thing about Marvel now and Avengers Campus is they have all those costumes of these characters that appear for like 1 week. Can you imagine if they brought like all of those out at once? Like
Right.
People would lose their minds at this point. But in any case, very cool. Thanks for having this convo, Mike. I very much enjoyed it. I'm glad you enjoyed at least parts of Throwback Night. And before you get out of here, is there anything you want to plug?
Sure. I've got a weekly Star Wars podcast called Who's the Boss? It's over at laughingplace.com, or you can find it anywhere you get your podcast. Jeff, I have to have you back on the show at some point. I know, like you said, you're a more casual Star Wars fan, so it's a little more difficult to come up with a topic to talk about with you. But if you ever have...
Can we talk about the Muppets Star Wars episodes?
That would be an awesome episode. So yes,
let's
put that on the list. I'm going to put that on my upcoming episodes list, and we'll go through that. That would be a blast.
Great. Excellent. So check it. Where can they check it out? Just search for Who's the Boss?
You could search for Who's the Boss on Google. You can find it anywhere you get a podcast, or just go to laughingplace.com and it's up there as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And hopefully I'll see you in the parks again real soon.
See you soon.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Don't miss any future episodes by subscribing and following Disney with a Z, coast to coast on your favorite podcast app, where episodes are available 24/7. If you're a longtime listener of the show, thank you. And if you have the means, consider supporting the show over on Patreon. By joining Disney Coast to Coast's Patreon membership, you'll gain access to extra bonuses, including live stream Ask Me Anythings, unreleased episodes, and more bonus content. Take a look at all that's available by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description, and thank you for considering. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description, from additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!